Welcome. My name is Debbie Mathew. I'm an artist and also a yoga teacher. So I'm originally from Canada. In fact, I grew up in Northern Ontario, and I came to the US in order to do a master's in fine arts at the University of Arizona in 1990, and I've been in the States ever since. I ended up moving to Laramie, Wyoming in 1993, and I worked at the university in the art department for 7 years. And then I ultimately created a yoga studio and have been teaching and guiding students in yoga ever since. All the while, I've been a practicing artist, and I love doing what I'm doing. And right now, I'm focused primarily on making encaustic artworks. And as you'll see in this video, how I do it from start to finish.
Encaustic is basically beeswax, and mixed media are images and beads and crystals and other such things. First, we need a substrate, something that I can paint the warm melted wax onto. Wood is a wonderful material for this, and so what I've come to prefer is something called a cradled panel board. So what I'm showing you here is a smooth wood surface that I'll paint the warm wax on, and so it adheres very nicely. And now I've turned it over to show you the cradling. Now these edges are what is called the cradle, and they're basically a frame to create a rigid platform for the top surface. Now what I'm showing you is a smaller piece. They come in all shapes and sizes. The back could have a little bit broader or wider cradle, as in this case. And on the one I'm showing you here, I have taped with blue masking tape the raw wood edges because I plan to put on a frame later, so I want it clean. So the cradled board is what I prefer. I add several coats of melted beeswax, either white or yellow or a mixture of them, on the wood, layering up so that it adheres nicely by fusing in between using a blowtorch. So as you can see, it takes several passes of the hot blowtorch to melt the wax evenly, to reduce and release any air bubbles that get trapped, and to create a nice soft surface which is then compatible for subsequent layers.
So now I'm going to be putting on some coats of colored wax. Now this is wax that I've melted. I buy color blocks of wax which look like this. You can see this is a red, one of my favorite. But here I'm putting a coat of blue on, and this blue is mixed from those blocks which are highly condensed pigments within a medium of beeswax and the damar resin I spoke of. And what I'm putting on here is a mixture that I've thinned, not a great deal on this particular one, but thinned with the medium. So again, that medium is simply a mixture of natural purified beeswax, so it doesn't have pollen and anything dirty in it, detritus and all that stuff, and it's mixed with damar resin to make it a little harder.
And now I'm going to fuse this blue layer on.
Now I'm going to add another layer. I'm going from dark to light on this panel. And I'm going to work to cover over some of the areas that are either too flat, not very interesting. It's pretty intuitive. Or also if there's too much of a particular pattern on the top that's been created from the prior melding of the layers by fusing with heat. So I want to add these layers when the prior layer is warm and can accept the new layer. That ensures that I'm going to get a very good fusing bond. And I'm going to fuse this layer. All right, so I'm just responding to the surface. I'm going to put on another layer, and this time I'm going to add a few different blues back to the dark blue that I started with. And then I'm also going to go into a more turquoisey blue. It's a very intuitive kind of playful approach. And I have another kind of greeny blue, a lighter version. Just going to put on a little of that. As you can see, the blowtorch ends up being a tool for really manipulating the surface. Not to any degree totally controllable, but you can see there is definitely a bit of play and fun involved. So once I've found some interesting images, like this one is called a Hempsa hand. It's actually a symbolic of a hand, kind of 5 fingers or 3 fingers, 2 thumbs. But it's a symbol that means protection.
And I'm going to color it.
So I'm particularly interested in symbology, symbols throughout various cultures, especially those that relate to ideas from the occult, which basically is just esoteric information, which is the root of all spiritual traditions. I often just do this when maybe I'm a little more tired, don't have the energy or the creative flow going through. Again, it's just part of the whole process.
I next wax the image. So I put a little wax on my hot plate that is about at 220 degrees temperature. And then I place the image down, so there's wax on the back side of it. And then I'll paint wax on the top side of it as well. So this creates a nice compatible surface for me to apply these images onto the actual wax surfaces. And then I put it in front of the fan, which is always blowing to take the fumes away. and that cools it.
So because I'm going to be applying this image directly on, I want clean edges. And so I remove the extra material, and here is the finished image. So what I have here is a bunch of smaller panels, mostly 10 by 10. I think there's an 11 by 14, two of them. And I've already put the wax layers on the base. I may add more or play around with them, but at this stage what I'm doing is just playing with imagery on the top. So I have a bunch of waxed images that are out and about here, and because these images are suggesting the content that I'm looking to create, I'm just playing very intuitively with how I'm going to place them. So it's all part of a particular energy that I'm trying to create on these. So as you can see, there's one I've already played with, finding some different kinds of textures on paper. And so I'm just playing with how these set up here, and I may or may not use them. So it's just at this point, a very intuitive process of how I go about creating what I'm trying to say in these. Now I've played with the imagery on the wax surfaces for another couple hours, and I dug out more images and made more images. Took some from my stash that I have. And now this is some of what I've created thus far. Here are several pieces now close to finished in terms of placement of the imagery. As you can see, I work in a series, which means I use similar imagery on different colored backgrounds. And then I'll transition now to one piece and take it to completion. This is the piece of work that I've decided to take to the finish.
So I begin with the piece with the approximate locations of the images. And then because the center point is very important, I always have something there. I'm centering the center of the hand image in this piece. So once I find that center point and I put the hand on, then I make sure that it's exactly oriented properly to the top and bottom. And then, as with every image, I use a sharp pin tool to outline the contour of the image. So once I take the image away, I'll know exactly where I want to lay it. But for now, I just continue the whole process of positioning and marking where each individual image is to go. And on this piece, I've noticed that the vine and flower images are a little thick the way the orange edges are. So in between I look at it, and now you can see I've trimmed off a lot of those extra edges and putting them in place. And now the final image of the elephant goes on. Pin it. And now I'm ready to transition to permanently affixing the images on. Here is the piece now with the images all pinned, and I'm going to shift now to adhering these images. So I simply start by removing some of the images, and I'm going to transition to warming that area. I warm the wax in the area that I want to put the images on using a heat gun. This is preferred over the torch because I have more control. So when I'm going to attach the hand, for example, here, I reheat it and then I place it right along within the contour lines I've made. And then to adhere it even more fully, I iron it on from the top using this little craft tool. That's a kind of a heat tool, and it has different nibs for it, and this is a flat round nib that works very well. That I just iron the whole thing on so I get a very good attachment for the images. And I continue the process of adding the different pieces, and now I'm focusing on that band of material on the bottom, and I'm putting a layer of white wax underneath so that the color remains light because it's a semi-transparent piece of paper. And then I'll wait for a while until it cools and then clean up the edges. And because I'm layering some more images on top, I put another coat of clear wax on and warm it up, then apply the images, and then again iron them down. So I've applied all the images now, and I'm using the heat gun just to soften the edges. I typically add beads along the contour of various images. So in this case, I'm going to put it around the contour of the hands. So I drill holes through in order to connect the wire that holds the beads. As I'm drilling these holes, wood from the substrate and wax from the surface get all intermingled, which I sometimes have to just discard as I'm going along. And then I clean up those edges using a little scraping tool, and then the back has a lot of splintering in wood and I don't want that to get stuck in the wax, so I remove it. Now I continue this process of drilling holes, which is about every half an inch more or less, and since I'm going to put beading all along those vines, it's kind of a lot of hole drilling and cleaning up of the wax on the front and cleaning up on the back of the splintering. So I've speeded it up so it's not quite so boring for you.
Now I'm preparing to add the beads along the surface. And I use a kind of flexible wire, and there's a little bit of option in terms of how thick exactly. For going around where there's kind of sometimes sharp turns, I use a 26 gauge kind of brass crafting wire. So I've cut a piece that is generous in terms of going all around the contour, the length of that, of the hand. And I've chosen the particular color that I want to put around here, and often I work with golds or something that's a little sparkly. In this case, I have this kind of orangey gold. I will use that wire and pick up these beads. And for this, because it's very simple in terms of the contour, I just go around the entire outside. In contrast to, for example, I've already done a little bit of beading along this vine line, and I've had to weave the wire in and out through this. So I go to the back of the panel through here, come back through above the flower image, and then continue. So I have to just bead and then go through and then bead again. But here, in this case, I can put all the beads on that I'm going to need in order to do the whole outline of the hand.
The beading can take a long time, which I don't mind at all, as it lends a meditative aspect to the artistic creation. So the hand is about 3.5 inches tall, and the contour around it quite a bit more.
Now I'm going to test and see if I have enough beads on this piece of wire. So I simply put the wire through the hole and I follow the contour around. This is kind of a rough estimate. And I also make the first kind of little placements of the wire where the contours change shape. And I'm pretty close, so I'm just going to go with that and refine later if I need to add or subtract a few. So the next step is to basically pin down the beads on the wire along the contour edge. So I use these little pieces of copper wiring. I think they came off of transistors, old kind of motors, and they work very well because it's thin wire. And I'll do a few at a time. Perhaps you can see this wire, what it looks like here. And I give plenty of room. It's a kind of about a 4 or 5 inch piece so that I can find it on the back when I pull it through, which you'll see me do momentarily. So I'll do a few like this. And then I use my little wax crafting tool with the different nibs or heads. And this time I have one that is pointed. It's kind of like an old-fashioned pen or quill that has a slit in the edge, so that when I put it in wax, this is a piece of wax I've made out of medium, pull up some wax into that nib, and then I start on that beginning edge where I've put the wire with the glass beads in it. And I melt the surface along that edge, and then I also add extra wax, and I wait just about the proper time that it's soft but not super soft and liquid. And then I press the beads into that. And then I line up this little loop of copper wire, and I go to the back and I pull it through, and I want it to go through between 2 beads so that it's pulled through and it remains even on the surface, but you can't see that wire. So what it looks like on the back is where I've pulled it through. You can see these copper wires coming through, and then these are the more brass colored wires, and those are the beginning and end of the actual wire that's holding the beads. So I just continue the process in this way. Now once that line of beads is secure on there, I clean up the edges, and then I flip the piece over once I've done all the cleanup, and I take 2 separate pieces of those copper wires and twist them together, and do that until all the wires are nice and neatly attached on the back.
Now I want to make some emphasis within the hand, so I'm outlining between the fingers and thumbs using smaller beads. So these are all glass beads. There's a lot of different options of what you can get, and the main size I use for the contour around the hand, for example, is size 11, and the inside between the fingers is size 15. And it just accents it in a nice way. And I'm doing the same thing as I did on the other, adhering it, using the copper wires to pull through and making the twisting and getting them out of the way in the back, tucking them in neat. And here is the finished hand. Then I do the very same beading along all the vines with the flowers. It's a little more complicated because I have to weave the wire in and out from the front to the back in between the flowers, and also you can see it's very complex. There is a lot of wires, so every once in a while I pause and I tidy them up, and I have to flip back and forth to basically thread the wire that I'm going to be adding beads on to do every little segment. The next step is I'm wanting to add crystals in the center of each of the flowers. So I drill holes through each of the flowers, and then I have to scrape off and clean it up, and then I glue in little nails. So I take these little nails with a flat head and I push them through the holes, and then I flip it over, and I want to secure those nails so they're not going to slip out. So I glue with epoxy glue resin on the base of those nails. Now it's time to apply the crystals, so I'm just using a little bit of Gorilla Glue, and I'll just do a few at a time so the glue doesn't dry beforehand, remains tacky. So I've already chosen the crystals, and I've just put a dot on the top of that nail head. Then I use tweezers to drop that crystal on top. I'll push it down a little, adding 24 crystals in total. The last crystal goes in the middle of the hand. I typically frame the whole series once I'm done, so I'll show you an example of a piece that I've framed using molding that I paint gold. Then I add a hanging wire on the back, and here is the finished piece without the frame yet. And that is how I create a mixed media encaustic artwork.